The Party of Power and the Woman in the Shadows. The night air over Manhattan glittered with the same restless energy as the glass towers that pierced the skyline, their reflections bending in the waters of the Hudson like columns of silver fire. At the top of one of those towers sat the Meridian Club, a place designed not merely for gatherings, but for demonstrations of power. Its ballroom tonight was alive with soft music, the sound of champagne glasses, and the low hum of conversations that carried weight in stock markets and boardrooms across the world. The Whitman Foundation Charity Gala was more than a social evening. It was a spectacle, a parade of old wealth draped in pearls, bow ties, and gowns. Every chandelier sparkled as if it wanted to prove its own importance. Every table carried a name card engraved in gold. The Whitman family moved through the crowd like royalty. James Whitman Sr., the patriarch, carried an air of final authority, his wrist heavy with a watch worth the yearly wages of the staff serving drinks. His wife, Catherine, wore her pearls like armor. Their daughter, Victoria, a flawless reflection of Manhattan high society, had perfected the art of sharp smiles that could slice through self-esteem in seconds. And Mark Jr., the son, wore arrogance the way others wore cologne, loud and suffocating. Their guests were senators, CEOs, actors, philanthropists, and a scattering of journalists eager to sip on the scent of power. Somewhere between the hum of violins and the soft clink of crystal, a woman in a simple black dress stepped into that ballroom. Her presence was like a shadow in a room of chandeliers. She was not tall, not flamboyant, not dripping with jewels. Her hair was neatly tied back, her dress plain, and her clutch modest and worn. She looked like someone who had slipped in by accident, someone who belonged in the service elevator rat, her than the main floor. And in truth, that was what many assumed at first glance. Heads tilted, whispers passed like wind-brushing silk. Who was she? The servers knew her face. Some of them froze when they saw her, unsure if she was there to work or to attend. Keisha Walker had lived her life in shadows like this, present but unseen, vital but ignored. By day, she carried out shifts that bent her back and left her hands raw from cleaning chemicals. By night, she studied balance sheets, governance reports, and contracts, not because they were her job, but because they represented her people's future. She was not just a janitor, she was a trustee of the Urban Service Workers Pension Fund, a responsibility that placed in her hands the collective future of thousands of men and women who scrubbed floors, changed linens, emptied bins, and kept cities alive after the elite had gone home. Tonight she was here because the fund's capital had a seat at the table, though few in the room realized it yet. The first to block her path was Victoria Whitman. "Sorry," Victoria said, her voice thin as crystal about to crack. "I don't see your name on the guest list." Her tone carried more than words. It carried judgment. Around them the crowd shifted, scenting conflict, their phones sliding discreetly into recording mode. Keisha's calm eyes met hers. "Perhaps you should check again." Her voice was soft but anchored, like water running deep under ice. Catherine Whitman joined her daughter, her pearls catching the chandelier light. "The help should know their place," she said, her smile brittle. Mark Jr. laughed, nasal and sharp, raising his phone as if she were an act on stage. "Dad, call security," he jeered, already imagining the viral clip. James Whitman Sr. did not laugh, but his slight nod was worse. It was dismissal, the cold acknowledgement of someone unworthy of standing where chandelier shone. Security approached. "Ma'am, may we see your invitation?" Kesha opened her clutch. From it she drew a cream-colored embossed card, one that shimmered under the lights with the official seal of the Meridian Club. The guard hesitated. "Looks valid," he murmured. The word "looks" clung to the air like suspicion. Catherine chuckled coldly. "Sometimes invitations get misplaced or copied," she said. Victoria tilted her chin toward the service elevator. "That one's for staff. You understand?" The words sliced. Every phone captured the moment. The insult compressed into a direction toward the service elevator. The live stream counter ticked upward. 400, 8:47, 2000. The world outside was watching, and yet inside the marble bubble, the family acted as though rehearsal rules still applied. Keisha did not move toward the service elevator. She let the silence stretch. "I'll wait for the main elevator," she said. Then she added, "And while I wait, I have a few calls to make." Her words dropped like stones into the quiet. She had no raised voice, no sharp gesture, but already something in her tone unsettled the room. When Catherine squinted and asked, "Which department are you from? Laundry? Housekeeping?" Keisha did not flinch. She answered evenly, "I am a night cleaning shift worker and trustee of the Urban Service Workers Pension Fund. Tonight I'm here as a guest of Meridian." It was the first time the air cracked. A few eyes widened. A few phones trembled in hands, now realizing they might be recording not humiliation, but history. But the family pressed on. Mark Jr. sneered, "Never heard of it." He lifted her business card, reading aloud, "Washington Capital Management? Some tiny firm trying to sneak in?" The comments on the live stream exploded. "WCM, $50 billion AUM. Google it. Lady, you're about to regret it." Security repeated their line, "Ma'am, please step aside." But Keisha only raised her phone. The name flashing across it was Marcus Reed, CIO of Washington Capital Management. "Marcus," she said into the line, her calm voice carrying across the acoustics of marble and crystal, "we need to talk about the Meridian partnership." The Whitmans faltered. The chandeliers still glowed, the violins still played, but the music now seemed like background to a trial. Victoria's grip on her glass cracked the stem. Mark Jr.'s phone lowered uselessly. James Sr.'s eyes narrowed, sweat beading. The crowd leaned in, sensing the air turning. The woman in the black dress was no longer invisible. She was holding the lever that moved $1 billion. And that was only the beginning. The silence before the storm. The chandeliers above the ballroom blazed brighter as if they sensed the tension unfolding beneath them, their crystals scattering sharp spears of light that caught every bead of sweat, every trembling hand, every hungry eye in the room. Manhattan's elite had gathered expecting an evening of polished speeches, staged philanthropy, and photographs destined for glossy magazines. What they received instead was a collision between two worlds, the untouchable certainty of old wealth and the quiet, steady force of a woman they had spent their lives stepping around without ever truly seeing. Keisha Walker stood as if the polished marble itself had risen beneath her feet to give her height. She did not need sequins, pearls, or flashing diamonds. Her presence, sharpened by decades of being underestimated, cut deeper than any jewel could. She had already made one phone call that shifted the ground beneath the Whitman family's shoes, and though she lowered her phone now, the silence she left in the air became heavier than the chandeliers themselves. Across from her, James Whitman Sr. shifted uncomfortably. His cufflinks gleamed, but his hand trembled slightly as he adjusted them. He had built his empire on control, on the ability to dictate a room with a single glance. Yet tonight control was slipping like sand between his fingers. His wife Catherine clung to her pearls as though their cold smoothness could anchor her dignity. Their children, Victoria with her brittle beauty, and Mark Jr. with his smug arrogance, were unraveling in front of the crowd. Their laughter from moments earlier had curdled into silence, and the cameras of 1,000 watching eyes were now trained not on them, but on Keisha. "Do you understand what you are risking?" James Sr. finally spoke, his voice low, his tone rehearsed like a man accustomed to turning storms into light breezes. "This is a charity gala, not a boardroom." His words sought to minimize, to reduce her into someone speaking out of place. But the tactic failed, for Keisha did not raise her voice to match his. She spoke softly, evenly, and the acoustics of marble did the rest. "This room," she said, her eyes never leaving his, "is built on the same foundations as your boardroom. Marble and chandeliers are only different walls, but power, It doesn't change its face when you move it from one space to another, and tonight, I carry more power than you are willing to admit." The crowd gasped lightly, like wind catching fire. Somewhere in the far corner, a journalist's fingers flew faster across his laptop keys, already framing headlines that would ripple across financial markets by dawn. Victoria stepped forward, her high heels clicking against the marble with the confidence of someone who had always been shielded by privilege. "You have no right to humiliate my family in public," she snapped, her voice cracking as it ricocheted off the walls. "If you have an issue, you take it. Behind closed doors. That's how it's done." Keisha turned toward her with a calmness that silenced even the background violins. "Behind closed doors is how power hides its sins," she replied. "Tonight, those doors are open. Every phone in this room is a window, and the world outside is watching. There is no private space anymore when dignity is stripped in public." The live stream counter surged. 20,000, 35,000, 52,000. The comments exploded, a storm of words scrolling too fast to read. "She's right. Power shift. History unfolding." The hashtags #Whitman Gala and #workers capital lit up social media maps across New York like a constellation. Catherine's fingers twisted her pearls tighter. "You're threatening us," she hissed. Her words carried venom, but her eyes betrayed fear, the kind that came from realizing wealth could not buy silence when silence itself became a currency she no longer owned. "I am not threatening you," Keisha said gently. "I am reminding you that money does not erase accountability. Tonight I speak not for myself, but for thousands of workers who give their bodies to clean your glass, to polish your marble, to make your wealth sparkle. Their capital, their pensions, their savings, these are tied to your reputation. And when you mock the hands that polish your floors, you mock the very people who keep your empire standing." The sentence landed like iron against glass. For the first time, James Sr. leaned back as though struck. Mark Jr., who had been recording for his social media, lowered his phone and stared at the screen as comments streamed in faster than he could comprehend. His smirk drained into pale disbelief. Mark Jr. mocking workers, caught live, trended within seconds, spreading far beyond the ballroom. The two security guards, who had once flanked her with professional detachment, now shifted uneasily. They were men accustomed to following G orders, but tonight the air around them shifted, thickened, as though their instincts recognized authority in her quiet composure. Keisha raised her phone again. "Marcus," she said softly, "I need legal on the line. Confirm if Section 472C of the Meridian contract allows termination if a partner causes reputational damage." The entire room leaned closer. The chandelier light caught the faint scratches on her steel watch as she listened. Then came the reply, the cold metallic tone of legal confirmation. "Yes. Clause allows termination. Immediate execution permitted." A glass shattered against the marble floor. Victoria flinched, the stem broken in her hand. "What does that mean?" she demanded, her voice thin, desperate. "Dad, what does that mean?" But James Sr. already knew. His lips pressed into a tight line, his eyes fixed on the floor as though searching for escape. He had spent decades building billion-dollar deals, smoothing crises, but never had he seen one unravel at the hands of someone whose name he had not cared to remember. Keisha's voice rose only slightly, steady and deliberate. "It means the $1.2 billion partnership your family was ready to announce tonight will not go forward. It means that when you told me to use the service elevator, you were pointing not only at me, but at the capital of every worker who trusted me with their future, and I do not allow their dignity to be dragged into back rooms." The room erupted, not in noise, but in silence so absolute that it seemed the chandeliers themselves held their breath. Every eye was locked on her, Every phone was raised. The violins had stopped playing without anyone noticing. The only sound was the faint crackle of the live stream as it crossed 80,000 viewers. In that silence, Keisha slid a cream-colored document from her clutch and placed it on the edge of a champagne tray. The bold letters of Washington Capital Equity Stewardship caught the light. "I like facts," she said. "Last quarter, Whitman Industries report. TED revenue of $847 million. Am I correct?" A journalist's head shot up. His eyes narrowed, recognizing the exact figure from SEC filings. "Correct," he whispered, almost in awe. The number, 847, echoed in the air like a refrain, like a ghost returning to haunt. James Sr. swallowed hard, his hands clenched into fists, but he could not deny it. Keisha lifted her phone once more. "Marcus, execute the withdrawal immediately. Terminate the deal. The fund will cover termination fees. That is the price of dignity." The words cut through marble, chandeliers, wealth, and arrogance alike. They were not shouted. They were not decorated. They were carved into the air with the simplicity of truth. A champagne glass dropped. Someone gasped. Victoria's painted face turned ashen. Mark Jr. shook his head as if denial could rewrite the livestream that had already cemented his smirk into viral shame. Catherine clutched her pearls so tightly the string threatened to snap. And James Sr., once the immovable titan of Manhattan's old wealth, looked like a man who had just realized his empire could crack, not from the outside, but from within. The storm had not yet broken, but its silence was deafening. And in that silence, the woman in the black dress stood unshaken, a janitor whose calloused hands carried the weight of thousands, and who had just pulled the lever that collapsed a billion-dollar tower of arrogance. The collapse of a legacy. The ballroom never recovered its rhythm after Keisha's words. The music that had once floated elegantly between conversations had fallen silent, and the hum of idle chatter had collapsed into stunned silence. The Whitman Foundation Charity Gala, once intended to display opulence, now resembled a courtroom, the chandeliers glaring like interrogation lamps and the marble floor cold as judgment. No one dared move first. The waiters froze mid-step, their trays trembling slightly in their hands. Guests clutched their champagne glasses as though their crystal stems could anchor them to a sense of normalcy that had slipped away. Journalists pressed deeper into corners, their eyes glowing with the anticipation of history being carved in real time. And in the center of it all stood Keisha Walker, the janitor whose hands still bore faint traces of bleach, the trustee whose voice had just erased a billion-dollar deal, and the woman who now commanded the room without raising her tone. For the first time in decades, James Whitman Sr. had nothing to say. His empire had been built on deals signed in oak-paneled rooms, on the certainty that power belonged to the men whose names were engraved on skyscrapers. Yet here, in front of hundreds of witnesses and tens of thousands watching online, his family's empire had been shaken not by another tycoon, but by a woman they had dismissed as invisible. His silence was more damning than rage. It was Mark Jr. who broke first. His arrogance, once so sharp it cut others with ease, now trembled into something desperate. He jabbed at his phone screen as though searching for an escape inside it, scrolling past the flood of comments that mocked him, that dissected his sneer, that turned his smirk into a meme spreading across the internet faster than any family lawyer could draft a cease and desist. His skin turned pale, his jaw clenched, but there was no way to undo what thousands of people had already replayed. Victoria's voice came next, brittle as porcelain. "You," she hissed, her hand trembling as she pointed toward Keisha. "You can't just walk into our lives and destroy what we've built. Do you know how many jobs depend on us? How many people will suffer because of your little display?" Her words were meant to shame, to frame Kez. As reckless, but they cracked in the air like glass dropped on stone. Keisha did not raise her voice to meet them. Instead, she stepped forward slowly, her heels steady against the marble, her steel watch glinting under the chandeliers. "This isn't about me," she said. "This is about accountability. You speak of jobs, But when your arrogance poisons your company's reputation, when your mockery of workers spreads across the world, who do you think pays the price first? Not you, not your children. It's the employees in warehouses, on factory floors, in janitorial closets, the very people you dismiss as disposable. Tonight, I pulled the brake before they became the casualties of your pride. The silence afterward was not empty. It was heavy, weighted with recognition. Even those in the room who had arrived to sip wine and shake hands now found themselves questioning where they had placed their loyalties. More than one executive looked down at their phone, silently calculating the cost of siding with arrogance versus siding with accountability. Catherine clutched her pearls until the skin of her knuckles turned white. Her voice broke through with venom. "This is extortion, plain and simple. You come into our event, humiliate us, and tear apart our work. What else would you call it but extortion?" Keisha's gaze softened but did not waver. Extortion is when someone demands without right. Tonight, I am exercising rights given to me by thousands of workers who entrusted me with their future. I did not create the humiliation. You did, when you chose to mock me and point me to the service elevator. I only revealed to the world what arrogance looks like under a chandelier. The live stream count hit 6 figures, 100,000 viewers, then 120,000. The comments poured in like floodwaters. Workers rise. Accountability at last. Janitors justice. Hashtags multiplied, spreading from New York to London to Mumbai within minutes. The gala, meant to project control, had instead detonated into a spectacle of reckoning. A reporter in the corner, David Kim, whispered into his recorder. "The night the janitor canceled $1 billion deal," he muttered. He knew headlines like that would echo for weeks, maybe years. And then, just as the tension felt like it might snap into chaos, the main elevator doors slid open with a dry chime. Every head turned. The polished steel panels reflected the room back at itself. Faces pale, pearls trembling, phones raised high. For a moment, no one moved, as though the elevator were an altar awaiting sacrifice. Keisha took a step toward it, her clutch steady in her hand. But before entering, she turned back once more to face the family. Her eyes swept over Victoria's fury, Mark Jr.'s pale despair, Catherine's rigid pearls, and James Sr.'s defeated silence. "We're not finished," she said softly. "Tonight was only the beginning." The doors slid shut behind her, sealing the moment into memory, into live stream archives, into the stories that would flood the world by morning. The chandeliers flickered slightly, and the gala that had been crafted to crown the Whitman family's legacy had instead recorded its undoing. By Monday morning, the ripples had become a tidal wave. Newspapers across the country carried headlines of the Whitman Gala collapse. Financial outlets dissected the details of the canceled partnership, analysts scrambling to explain how a trustee of a workers' pension fund had wielded such decisive power. Social media buzzed with clips of Keisha's calm words, her refusal to take the service elevator, her invocation of the dignity of labor. The image of her scratched steel watch under the chandeliers became iconic, a symbol of workers' capital rising against old wealth. In the Whitman household, silence reigned heavier than any scandal before. The patriarch had withdrawn into his office, taking calls from panicked board members, lawyers, and crisis managers. Victoria shut herself behind locked doors, her face splashed across tabloids alongside phrases like "heiress humiliated" and "mockery backfires." Mark Jr. faced an avalanche of ridicule, his face immortalized in memes that spread faster than wildfire. Catherine attempted to hold the family together, but even her pearls seemed to have lost their sheen. But while the family scrambled in desperation, Keisha was preparing for the next move. She had not acted out of vengeance alone. She had acted out of duty. She knew the weight of her responsibility. Hundreds of thousands of workers whose savings depended on the pension fund, men and women who would never step foot in such a ballroom, but whose futures were shaped by decisions made under chandeliers. And so, when she walked into the boardroom of Whitman Industries that Monday morning, she did not come as an intruder. She came as a shareholder, as a trustee, and as the voice of a silent army. The mahogany table gleamed under sterile lights. The directors of Whitman Industries sat rigid, papers stacked neatly before them, faces strained with the weight of what had transpired. At the head of the table sat James Sr., his posture stiff, his eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. The family's attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but even he could not mask the sense of collapse. And then the door opened. Keisha entered, her dress plain, her steel watch scratched, her notebook dog-eared. She carried no jewelry, no entourage, only 2 attorneys and a restructuring specialist who followed silently behind her. Every director's eyes tracked her, some with curiosity, some with admiration, some with fear. The acting chair cleared his throat. "We have quorum," he announced. "Reason for emergency session, petition from a shareholder group exceeding 10% per bylaws." His voice was dry as paper, yet heavy with history. Keisha sat opposite James Sr. Her presence filled the space not by volume, but by gravity. She opened her notebook, flipped a page, and waited. The chair continued. First agenda item, suspension of CEO Victoria Whitman, pending independent investigation into corporate governance and culture. A silence hung. Then votes clicked in, one by one, on the screen at the center of the table. Green lights lit up faster than anyone expected. Motion carried. Victoria, hidden behind frosted glass, exhaled sharply. Her reign of untouchable privilege was over. The chair read again. Second item, removal of COO Mark Whitman Jr. for conduct contrary to leadership standards and posing reputational risk. The votes came quicker this time, unanimous. Mark Jr. felt his chair as though it had turned to ice. His phone, once a tool of mockery, now lay dead in his pocket. For the first time, he realized that his arrogance had not only destroyed his image, but had buried his career. Then came the third item, something no one in the room expected. Keisha leaned forward, sliding a slim packet across the table. "The dignity protocol," she said, her voice calm. 4 pillars: training and standards, data transparency, whistleblower protection, and community investment. This is not a request. It is a condition of continued partnership with workers' capital. The directors bent over the packet, their brows furrowing as they scanned the details. For once, words like diversity, transparency, and protection were not vague slogans. They were measurable policies tied directly to leadership accountability. Bonuses and penalties would rise and fall, not by rhetoric, but by compliance. For years, these directors had dismissed such demands as noise, but tonight they realized noise had become thunder. Votes clicked once more. Motion carried. The Whitman legacy, once gilded and unshakable, was collapsing under the steady hand of a woman they had mocked, and this was only the third act of her story. The dignity protocol, the storm outside Whitman headquarters that Monday morning was nothing compared to the one inside. Reporters swarmed the sidewalks, cameras flashing, voices rising, microphones extended toward anyone who might have answers. Every headline carried the same thread: the gala that changed everything. Overnight, the Whitman name had shifted from a symbol of untouchable wealth to a case study in arrogance undone. Television anchors replayed the footage of Keisha Walker refusing the service elevator, her words echoing across marble like a verdict. "Respect is not a luxury," she had said, and the phrase was already printing on protest signs across the city. Inside the boardroom, the mood was thick with unease. The directors of Whitman Industries sat as though carved from stone, their posture stiff, their eyes avoiding each other. Some had built careers on loyalty to the family, others on fear of losing their positions. Yet now all of them felt the tremor of change. They had voted to suspend Victoria, to remove Mark Jr., to adopt Keisha's dignity protocol. But those votes were not just procedural, they were survival. The world outside was demanding accountability, and for the first time in decades, the boardroom's decisions could not be hidden behind oak doors. Keisha sat calmly at the table, her steel watch catching the sterile light of the ceiling fixtures. She was not dressed in designer suits or power colors. Her black dress was simple, her shoes plain, her notebook worn. And yet the gravity she carried bent the room around her. Every director leaned toward her, not out of courtesy, but because her presence demanded it. She had become the pivot around which this crisis turned. The restructuring specialist, seated at her side, clicked through slides on a screen. Charts showed projected revenue losses if the scandal deepened. Graphs outlined potential boycotts, and financial models predicted how long the company could withstand public backlash. At the heart of every chart was the same truth. Without credibility, Whitman Industries would bleed, and credibility could only be regained through something the family had never truly valued: respect. Keisha's voice broke the heavy silence. The dignity protocol is not a suggestion, it is a necessity. 4 pillars, each one measurable, each one enforceable. She leaned forward, her tone calm but unyielding. For too long, companies like this have treated respect as charity, as decoration. But dignity is not decoration. It is infrastructure. It is the foundation on which workers build loyalty, on which customers build trust, on which capital builds stability. Without it, your empire collapses, exactly as we are seeing now. She gestured to the packet. The first pillar, training and standards. Every executive, every manager, every supervisor will undergo a 40-hour inclusive leadership program, not a slideshow, not a checkbox. A program with real accountability. 8 dialogue principles. 4 quarterly review milestones. 7 transparency metrics. Completion will be tied to compensation. The directors exchanged uneasy glances. For years, training had been a formality, a box ticked on compliance sheets. But this was different. This would carve directly into their bonuses, into their reputations. Keisha continued without pause. The second pillar, data transparency. Quarterly public dashboards detailing workforce demographics, pay equity, promotion pipelines, and leadership accountability. No glossy reports with cherry-picked numbers. Raw data, verified, audited, published. A murmur rippled around the table. The idea of exposing internal structures to the public was radical, even dangerous, but Keisha's calm eyes silenced resistance. The third pillar, whistleblower protection. Anonymous channels managed by independent firms, investigations guaranteed, retaliation punished not with warnings but with termination, no exceptions. This time, one director cleared his throat. Ms. Walker, such measures could destabilize. Employees could misuse the channels. False reports. Keisha cut in, her voice still even. False reports are rare. Fear is common. And fear silences truth. When truth is silenced, corruption grows. If you are afraid of transparency, it is because you are afraid of what will be seen. That fear is not reason to hide. It is reason to reform. The room fell silent again. Even the attorney at James Sr.'s side shifted uncomfortably. And the fourth pillar, Keisha said, her voice steadying into steel. Community investment. $50 million seeded by Washington Capital, matched by Whitman Industries to fund minority-owned businesses and community programs over 3 years. This is not charity. This is restitution. This is recognition that wealth built on the backs of workers must be reinvested in the communities that made it possible. Her words landed like hammers. The directors, men and women who had long operated in the comfort of distance, now felt the walls closing in. They had thought themselves untouchable, but here, across the table, sat a woman who had swept floors and polished marble, and she was redrawing the blueprint of power. James Sr. finally spoke. His voice was quieter than anyone had ever heard it, but still laced with pride. You think you can walk in here, tear apart a legacy, and rebuild it in your image? Do you know who we are? Do you know what we have built? Keisha's eyes met his, unblinking. I know exactly what you have built. You have built marble floors on the backs of invisible workers. You have built chandeliers on wages that never reached the people who cleaned under them. You have built legacies on arrogance disguised as tradition. But legacies are fragile things, Mr. Whitman. They can collapse in one night, as you have seen. I am not rebuilding in my image. I am rebuilding in the image of justice. The word struck harder than any accusation. Even those loyal to James Sr. could not deny the truth in them. The boardroom that had once bowed to him now seemed to lean toward her. The vote was called. One by one, the directors pressed their buttons. Green lights flashed on the screen. The dignity protocol was adopted. Keisha closed her notebook. She did not smile, did not celebrate. She only nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a step completed in a longer journey. For her, this was not victory. It was duty. That evening, the news spread like wildfire. Financial outlets framed it as a revolution in corporate governance. Social media declared it a victory for workers everywhere. Clips of Keisha's calm dismantling of arrogance replayed endlessly. Hashtags like #HadDignityProtocol, #WorkersCapital, and #JanitorJustice trended worldwide. In small towns and big cities, janitors, waitresses, drivers, and warehouse workers shared the clips with pride, their comments echoing the same sentiment. Finally, someone sees us. At the same time, backlash brewed. Anonymous opinion pieces accused Keisha of overreach, of turning corporate governance into personal vendetta. Political commentators debated whether pension funds should wield such power. Some praised her as a hero, others painted her as a threat to tradition, but through it all, her words from the ballroom replayed. Dignity is not decoration, it is infrastructure. The wit. Mann family retreated from public view. Victoria's resignation letter leaked, her once polished sentences tinged with bitterness. Mark Jr. faced mockery wherever he appeared, his name now shorthand for arrogance unchecked. Catherine clung to the fragments of social circles that still answered her calls. And James Sr., once the embodiment of control, now sat in silence, his empire reshaped not by rivals, but by a woman whose name he had mocked. But for Keisha, the work was not over. She knew change did not come from one boardroom vote or one viral clip. Change was slow, grinding, resisted at every turn. The dignity protocol was only the beginning, and she was prepared to defend it with the same quiet strength she had carried into the ballroom. For in her heart, she knew this truth. Wealth can build walls, but dignity can tear them down. And now the world was watching to see which would stand. The backlash. The adoption of the dignity protocol sent tremors far beyond the walls of Whitman Industries. What began as a single confrontation in a ballroom had now become a movement, a phrase on everyone's lips, a case study in universities, a rallying cry in union halls, and a storm in financial boardrooms. The headlines did not fade with the usual 24-hour cycle. They grew, they multiplied. Newspapers in Europe wrote of a janitor's revolution. News anchors in Asia debated whether pension funds could become the guardians of dignity in a world obsessed with profit margins. Social media platforms replayed the footage endlessly, stitching Keisha's calm voice over videos of workers cleaning subways, scrubbing kitchens, and stocking shelves. To many, she had become a symbol, a reminder that even those deemed invisible carried unseen power. But with visibility came backlash. Within a week, lobbyists began their work. Anonymous op-eds appeared in major financial publications, branding Keisha's actions as reckless, her reforms as dangerous to free enterprise. Words like overreach, politicization, and populism painted her as a threat rather than a reformer. A televised debate featured a well-known investment banker shaking his head solemnly, declaring, "If janitors can dictate billion-dollar deals, then capitalism is broken." His words traveled far, igniting conversations in every corner of society. Some applauded the fear he displayed, others echoed his concern, and still others laughed at the irony that men with billions feared a woman who carried bleach on her hands. Inside Whitman Industries, resistance grew in whispers. Directors who had voted for the dignity protocol in public now grumbled in private about the weight of compliance. Managers complained about training hours eating into their schedules. Anonymous leaks suggested that some executives were quietly trying to water down the reforms, turning pillars of dignity into hollow slogans once more. The old guard was regrouping, waiting for a moment when the world's attention would waver. Keisha knew it would happen. Change was never welcomed by those who benefited from the old order. She had walked through too many polished lobbies and seen too many bowed heads to believe arrogance would surrender without resistance. But what she had underestimated was how personal the backlash would become. One evening, as she left her modest apartment, she found a note taped to her door. The handwriting was jagged, the words blunt. "Stay in your place. You've gone too far." She crumpled it silently, her face unreadable, but inside her chest a storm raged. It was not fear for herself. She had endured stares, insults, and dismissals all her life. It was fear that the movement she represented might falter if they silenced her. The next morning, an anonymous article claimed she had misused pension funds for personal gain. The accusation was false, built from twisted numbers and invented transactions, but it spread quickly, feeding on doubt. Commentators debated it on talk shows, some pretending neutrality while seeding suspicion. "Where there's smoke, there's fire," one anchor suggested, and the phrase replayed across news cycles. For the first time, Keisha felt the weight of carrying not only her own dignity, but the trust of thousands of workers. Every janitor, cleaner, and custodian who had seen hope in her eyes now depended on her to stand firm. If she faltered, their dignity would be mocked again, their power dismissed as a temporary illusion. She could not fail them. Washington Capital Management moved quickly to defend her. Marcus Reed, the CIO, appeared on national television, calmly dismantling the false accusations. "Every cent is accounted for," he said. "Transparency is the principle on which we operate, and Ms. Walker has been beyond reproach." His voice carried authority, but the seeds of doubt had already been planted, and Keisha knew they would grow unless uprooted with truth. Meanwhile, allies began to emerge from unexpected places. Dr. Liz Carter, the academic who had first identified Keisha at the Gala, published a fiery essay titled "Workers' Capital and the Future of Governance." It spread rapidly, not only in universities, but in union halls and community centers. A group of young employees at Whitman Industries began circulating an internal petition demanding full implementation of the Dignity Protocol, gathering thousands of signatures in days. And janitors across the city began leaving handwritten notes on break room walls. "We are with Keisha." One night, as she walked through a subway station on her way home, a cleaner in an orange vest stopped her. He looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot, but his eyes burned with conviction. "They call you a troublemaker," he said softly. "But for the first time, my daughter believes my job has meaning. Don't stop." The words nearly broke her. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment, and when she finally did, her voice cracked. "I won't stop." Inside the Whitman family mansion, the mood was darker still. Victoria rarely left her room, her once flawless image shattered in the public eye. Mark Jr. avoided social gatherings, his name now synonymous with arrogance. Catherine paced the halls endlessly, her pearls clinking like chains. And James Sr. sat at his desk long past midnight, staring at reports that told him what he refused to admit, that his family's empire was no longer theirs to command. "They're turning her into a saint," Catherine hissed one evening, slamming down a newspaper with Keisha's face on the front. "She's rewriting history. Do something, James." James Sr. did not answer. He had built his life on control, but for the first time, he felt powerless. Every move he made seemed to strengthen her. Every attempt to undermine her revealed his own weakness. He was watching his legacy unravel, thread by thread, and the more he pulled, the faster it collapsed. But while the family struggled in silence, Keisha prepared for her next challenge. She knew the backlash was not simply about her. It was about the thousands she represented. The dignity protocol was a line in the sand, and already powerful forces were plotting to erase it. Lobbyists whispered in the ears of lawmakers, executives schemed behind closed doors, and journalists sought scandals in shadows. If she faltered now, dignity would once again be dismissed as decoration, not infrastructure. So she did what she had always done. She returned to her roots. Late at night, she visited the janitorial staff of hospitals, schools, and office towers. She listened to their stories, their fears, their hopes. She reminded them that this was not her fight alone. It was theirs. And slowly, as the backlash grew louder, so did the support. Videos of cleaners and custodians speaking about the dignity protocol began to circulate online, each one ending with the same phrase: "We are not invisible anymore." The storm was far from over. The backlash was only beginning. But as she walked through those midnight corridors, hearing the voices of those who had always been unheard, Keisha felt something stronger than fear rising inside her. It was resolve. Because dignity, once demanded, could never again be unseen. The breaking point. By the second week, the city itself felt as though it was living inside the storm that had erupted from one quiet woman's refusal to bow. Posters of Keisha's silhouette, her steel watch raised like a symbol, appeared on subway walls. Editorials debated her legacy while it was still being written. Some called her the janitor who changed Wall Street. Others branded her the most dangerous woman in corporate America. Television panels filled every night with men in expensive suits trying to explain how someone they had never bothered to notice could shift the balance of power with a single phone call. But while the world argued, inside Whitman Industries the battle was raging in silence. The dignity protocol had been adopted, but its foundations were under siege. A faction of senior executives had begun a campaign of quiet sabotage. Training schedules were mysteriously delayed. Transparency dashboards watered down into meaningless charts. Whistleblower channels redirected to internal departments where complaints disappeared into silence. On the surfaces, the company claimed compliance. Beneath, the old order was regrouping, waiting for the storm to pass. Keisha knew it. She could feel it in the way certain reports landed on her desk late, in the nervous silence of lower-level managers, in the sudden leaks to the press suggesting her reforms were failing. The old guard wanted her discredited. They wanted the world to believe she had been a brief spectacle, a viral headline, not a permanent force. One morning, she walked into a meeting with mid-level employees at headquarters. The room was filled with men and women who looked tired but wary. They had been told to attend a discussion on company culture, but their eyes revealed hesitation, fear of speaking truth in a system that punished honesty. Keisha stood at the front of the room, her notebook open, but her eyes focused on them. "I know what you've been told," she began softly. "I know you're afraid of retaliation. I know some of you believe this is just another initiative that will fade in a few weeks. But let me tell you something. This is not decoration. This is not a slogan. This is your protection. And if you do not claim it, the people who mocked me at that gala will take it away from you." Silence hung heavy. Then, slowly, a young analyst raised her hand. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "We filed a complaint last week. 3 of us. It disappeared. No record. No reply." Keisha felt the anger rise in her chest, but she kept her voice even. "That will change." Another voice rose from the back. "They tell us whistleblowers will be protected, but last year my colleague was fired for raising concerns. Nothing happened. How can we trust this now?" Keisha's eyes softened. "You can trust me," she said, "but more importantly, you can trust each other. Alone, you are vulnerable. Together, you are unshakable." They silence one of you because they think the rest will remain quiet. But if you rise together, they cannot silence all of you. This protocol is not about me. It is about you refusing to disappear again. The words cut through fear like light through fog. Heads began to lift, shoulders to straighten. For the first time, some of them believed this was not another passing program. But the enemy was watching. 2 days later, a scandal erupted in the press. An anonymous source leaked documents claiming Kesha had pressured the board to divert funds into projects connected to her personal network. The numbers were fabricated, but the headlines screamed louder than truth. The janitor's power grab? Hero or hypocrite? News outlets that had once praised her now questioned her integrity. Late-night hosts cracked jokes about mop buckets and billion-dollar deals. Kesha sat in her small apartment, the glow of the television casting her shadow on the wall. She had been mocked before, dismissed before, but this was different. This was not about her alone. It was about the movement, the workers who had placed their faith in her. If she fell, the dignity protocol would fall with her, and dignity itself would once again be ridiculed as weakness. Marcus Reed called that night. His voice was calm but urgent. "They're trying to break you. Don't let them. We'll fight this. Every number will be audited, every lie dismantled. But you must hold steady, Kesha. If you falter now, they win." She closed her eyes, her hand tightening around her steel watch. "I won't falter," she whispered. "But they won't stop." The next morning she walked into the boardroom again. The directors sat stiff, some faces sympathetic, others calculating. James Sr. was there too, his eyes sharper than they had been in weeks. He looked at her not as a defeated man, but as a hunter waiting for weakness. "You see," he said, his voice carrying the weight of vindication, "this is what happens when you put power in the wrong hands. Scandal, chaos, instability. You've turned this company into a circus." Kesha met his gaze calmly. "This scandal was created by people who fear change. They are the ones destabilizing this company, not me. You call this chaos. I call it truth resisting silence." The attorney at his side leaned forward. "The board must consider whether your continued involvement is a liability. If the markets believe these accusations, stock value collapses. Investors flee, jobs vanish. Is that the dignity you claim to protect?" Kesha let the words hang. Then she spoke, softly but firmly. "Dignity is not the cause of instability. Corruption is. Cover-ups are. The arrogance that mocked me in front of thousands is. If you strip dignity now to protect your image, you will discover too late that without dignity, there is no image left to protect." The room fell into silence. For a moment, even James Sr. had no reply. Outside, protests began. Workers from across the city gathered in front of Whitman headquarters, carrying signs that read, "Respect is infrastructure, and we are with Kesha." Social media surged again, with thousands posting stories of workplace indignities that had gone unseen for years. The backlash that had sought to isolate her had instead drawn more voices to her side. One evening, as she left the building surrounded by chants and cameras, an older janitor approached her. His face was lined with years of night shifts, his hands rough, his back bent. He placed a folded piece of paper in her hand. "This is from all of us," he said quietly. She unfolded it later, in the solitude of her apartment. Inside were hundreds of signatures, workers from across industries pledging their support. At the bottom was a simple message: "We've cleaned your floors long enough. Now we stand with you to clean the system." Her chest tightened. Tears filled her eyes, but they did not fall. She felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever, but she also felt something else. A force stronger than money, stronger than headlines, stronger than the Whitman name itself. It was solidarity. Inside the mansion, the Whitman family gathered in silence. Victoria stared at her phone, watching clips of crowds chanting Kesha's name. Mark Jr. muttered curses under his breath, blaming everyone but himself. Catherine paced, pearls clicking, and James Sr. sat motionless, his face carved in stone. Finally he spoke. "We underestimated her," he said, his voice grim. "We thought she was a moment. She is becoming a movement." His words were not admiration, they were recognition. And with recognition came a new kind of danger. For he was a man who had spent his life crushing movements before they could grow roots. And though he was weakened, he was not finished. Keisha had won battles, but the war for dignity was reaching its breaking point. The question now was not whether she could survive the backlash. The question was whether the movement she had sparked could outlast the storm determined to bury it. And as the city roared outside, as boardrooms whispered in shadows, as workers lifted their heads higher than ever before, one truth became clear: the storm was not subsiding. It was only gathering strength. The reckoning. The storm reached its peak on a cold morning when the city streets outside Whitman headquarters swelled with voices. From janitors and nurses to teachers and delivery drivers, thousands marched carrying signs that bore the same message. Dignity is not optional. The air shook with chants, the kind of rhythm that comes not from rehearsed slogans, but from lived pain finally given voice. Helicopters circled above, broadcasting the sight to millions across the country. The Gala scandal that had begun as a spectacle of humiliation had transformed into a national reckoning. Inside the towering glass building, the board of Whitman Industries convened for what was called the final session. The directors sat in tense silence, their faces drawn from weeks of pressure, their decisions shadowed by headlines, protests, and stock market tremors. At the head of the table sat James Whitman Sr., his face pale, but his eyes still burning with pride and resentment. On the other side sat Keisha Walker, her black dress plain as ever, her steel watch catching the sterile light, her notebook open to a fresh page. Between them stretched more than a mahogany table. It was a battlefield of two worlds colliding. The attorney began with a tone of forced calm. "Today, we must decide the future of this company. The scandals, the protests, the instability. Our investors are demanding resolution. Some propose full repeal of the Dignity Protocol. Others demand its defense. A line must be drawn." James Sr. leaned forward, his voice low but carrying. This company was built by vision, by risk, by discipline. It was not built by janitors. It was not built by those who mop floors. If we allow her, he gestured toward Keisha with a sharp flick of his hand, to dictate how we govern, then we are no longer leaders. We are captives of sentiment. Business is not built on dignity. It is built on profit, and profit demands order. His words struck the air like iron, but this time they did not silence the room. Several directors shifted uncomfortably. They had once bowed to his authority, but the protests outside, the headlines screaming of arrogance, and the voices of their own employees whispering in hallways had changed the ground beneath them. Keisha rose slowly, her presence steady, her voice calm but weighted with truth. "You speak of order, Mr. Whitman, but what kind of order mocks the very people who hold its foundation? What kind of order believes chandeliers shine brighter than the hands that polish them? You call dignity sentiment. I call it infrastructure. Without dignity, your profit is a house of glass, beautiful but fragile, ready to shatter at the first stone." The directors leaned closer, compelled. She continued, her voice growing firmer. "This movement is not about me. It is about the invisible workers who have carried this company for decades without recognition. They have been mocked, dismissed, underpaid, and ignored. Yet they are the reason your buildings stand, your machines run, your floors shine. Tonight, their voices are outside. Tomorrow, their capital will decide your future. And if you repeal dignity, you will discover that without them, there is no company left to lead." The words struck harder than any accusation. For a moment, even James Sr. faltered, his mouth opening but no sound emerging. The protests outside swelled, their chants audible through the glass walls. Respect is power. Dignity is strength. The acting chair cleared his throat. "We must vote. Repeal or defend the Dignity Protocol." The boardroom fell into silence, broken only by the click of buttons. One by one, lights on the screen turned green. Defend, defend, defend. The red lights of repeal flickered weakly, outnumbered, outshone. The final tally lit the room. Overwhelming defense. The dignity protocol stood. Keisha closed her notebook slowly. She did not smile, but her eyes glimmered with something deeper: resolve, relief, and a quiet triumph. The workers outside erupted in cheers, their voices carrying into the boardroom like the sound of history turning a page. James Sr. sat motionless, his empire broken not by rivals or recessions, but by the dignity he had once dismissed. Catherine clutched her pearls in silence. Victoria turned her face away from the glass. Mark Jr. stared at the table, his arrogance drained into pale red. For the first time, the Whitman family felt what they had forced on so many others: powerlessness. Kesha rose to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back once more at James Sr. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened. You thought dignity was weakness. Tonight you learned it is strength. Remember that. She stepped into the corridor, and the sound of cheers swelled around her, washing through the building like a tide that could not be held back. That evening, she stood on the steps of Whitman headquarters as thousands of workers cheered her name. Cameras flashed, microphones reached, voices clamored for a statement. She lifted her hand for silence, and the crowd hushed instantly. "I am not a hero," she began, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I am a worker, like all of you. I have scrubbed floors at midnight. I have carried the smell of bleach on my hands. I have been invisible in rooms where chandeliers shone brighter than my face. But tonight, we proved something to the world. We proved that workers are not shadows. We are not disposable. We are the foundation. And when we rise together, no wealth, no arrogance, no empire can dismiss us again." The crowd roared, the sound rolling through the city like thunder. Hashtags exploded across the world. Hashtag Janitor Justice. Hashtag Dignity Protocol. Hashtag Workers Rise. News outlets called it a turning point in corporate history. Commentators debated whether it marked the beginning of a new era where workers' capital would shape governance. But in break rooms, cafeterias, and subway platforms, workers simply smiled at one another and said, "She did it. We did it." Months later, the changes became visible. Whitman Industries released its first transparency dashboard. Real numbers, raw data, proof that the dignity protocol was alive. Whistleblower channels lit with reports, and for the first time, employees saw results instead of silence. The community fund launched, and minority-owned BUs, signesses across the city, received investments that changed lives. Training programs reshaped leadership, forcing executives to confront biases they had hidden behind polished suits. And through it all, Keisha remained the same. She did not move into a mansion. She did not buy pearls or diamonds. She still rode the subway, still carried her steel watch, still lived in her modest apartment. She continued her night shifts occasionally, not because she needed to, but because she refused to forget where she had come from. Workers smiled when they saw her mop a floor beside them. "You're proof," they said softly. "Proof that we matter." The Whitman family, once the embodiment of old wealth, faded into the background. Victoria resigned permanently, her name a cautionary tale. Mark Jr. disappeared from public life, his arrogance remembered only in memes. Catherine clung to her pearls in obscurity. And James Sr., once a titan, spent his last days in silence. Haunted by the night, a janitor dismantled his empire with nothing but dignity. Years later, when history books recorded the events, they did not describe the gala as a scandal. They described it as a turning point. They wrote of a woman in a simple black dress who refused the service elevator and, in doing so, lifted workers everywhere. They wrote of the dignity protocol as the first step in a larger movement that reshaped the way companies saw those who built their foundations. But for the workers who had lived it, the story was simpler. It was about a woman who had carried bleach on her hands and steel on her wrist, who had spoken calmly under chandeliers, and who had shown that dignity was not a decoration, but the very heart of power. And for Keisha Walker, it was never about fame, never about revenge. It was about one simple truth, one she carried every night as she looked at her scratched steel watch before sleep. Respect is not given by wealth. Respect is demanded by dignity, and once demanded, it can never again be unseen.